This time of year always gets me. The fresh start energy, the new planners, the shiny productivity apps promising to solve everything. And I'll be honest, my ADHD brain used to fall for it every single time. And if you can relate, stick with me, because before we toss out our current systems and start completely fresh, let's pause. There's something important we need to talk about first, and it's all happening on episode 318 of the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Happy September. I don't know about you, but this time of year always brings a kind of reset energy with it. The shift from the less structured rhythm of the summer into the routines of the fall, it's just there. And I think for a lot of us, it feels like this second new year. Even if you don't have kids, even if you have no connection to the academic calendar, I still think for the majority of us who grew up with a summer break and a 9-ish month school year as kids, it's hard to get that feeling out of our system as adults. Again, it's just there. And in years past, it was this time of year when my brain started thinking things like, okay, this is going to be it. I'm finally going to get organized. I'm going to stay on top of things. I'm finally going to get my act together. And while I don't tend to have that pattern so much anymore, I still absolutely have the same brain that loves fresh starts and new beginnings and the novelty of new apps and strategies. So you better believe that when my brain sees back to school supplies and new planners and shiny apps, it takes everything within my power to not completely throw out my entire system and start with something completely new. And I'm guessing you might be able to relate to one of these scenarios as well. So often we find ourselves lit up by this new planner or system or app, and our brains think something like, okay, this is it. This is going to be the tool that actually keeps me on track. But here's the thing we're going to talk about today. It is rarely ever only about the app. It is rarely ever only about the actual planner. The specific tool is rarely the reason why we feel off track or scattered. Now, can it play a role? Absolutely. Is it the entire reason? Rarely ever. And when we don't pause to ask ourselves why we are switching systems or identify the specific problems that we have with our current systems, it is so easy to get swept up in the allure of something completely new without actually solving the real obstacle, without ever figuring out what we truly need. So in this episode, we're going to get intentional. We are going to unpack, firstly, why our ADHD brains seek these new tools and apps so readily, the very real cost of switching systems, and the one powerful question that I love to ask myself and my clients before we adopt something new. So let's dig in. Now, let me be totally clear. I absolutely fall into this trap as well. I just mentioned that. I love the novelty. I love the fresh start energy. It is like our second new year. As we know, there is so much dopamine in the chase for a new solution. When our current system doesn't seem to be working, of course, we want something that promises to make things easier, smoother, better. As an aside, we have huge thunderstorms going through right now. I'm not sure if you can hear the thunder. Apologies in advance if you can't. It is a storm. But like I said, of course, we're going to reach for some app that makes things easier, better, smoother if we're struggling with our current setup. And that setting up of the new app, it feels productive. We're customizing, we're organizing, we're learning something new. And in that moment, it seems like we are taking massive action, like we're being really productive. And again, this is where it does get tricky. It's not black and white. We have gray here. Sometimes it really is a great use of our time. If we decide we are going to adopt a new app, I think it can be a really good use of time to truly learn how to use this app and all of its capabilities. But more often than not, we spend all of that time researching, comparing, downloading, and updating, and all of it's more or less procrastinating. I will absolutely speak for myself. that what often lies behind that procrasti-work, what's hiding back there, is a toddler brain trying to avoid the actual thing on my list. It convinces me that if I just try a new app to map out the process for doing my quarterly taxes, I might actually feel more motivated to do them. Let me tell you, it will not. The actual act of doing those quarterly taxes is still the same, whether it's in a color-coded box in TickTick or built in the Reminders app on my phone or written in a paper planner. The only difference is that I shifted where the task lives. The task itself doesn't change. In fact, I was just coaching one of my clients on this recently, and he had such a brilliant analogy to describe this experience. He was juggling a handful of different apps and wasn't quite sure whether he should keep them or try some sort of all-in-one app because he couldn't find one, the all-in-one type that he actually liked. So he was debating, should I keep all the different ones I'm using? Should I use an all-in-one? I don't know. I just feel really scattered. And he said, honestly, it feels like I'm constantly moving apartments, like I'm rearranging furniture, trying out different rooms, but never quite sure where to settle. And first of all, I think this is such a spot-on description. I love it so much. When we are always switching apps, it's like we are constantly moving from one home to the next, and we're not quite sure whether we've unpacked the item that we're looking for, or if it's still in some box labeled as miscellaneous. And if we did unpack it, we're not sure where it actually landed. And we end up spending so much time constantly looking for the stuff. And as we talked about this further, my client shared this other realization as well. He said, when life feels chaotic, building a new system feels like control. Setting up that system feels like a fresh start. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many of us feel pulled to new systems and solutions during this period of transition from summer to fall. When the real obstacle is a tough transition or an overwhelming season of life, our brains love to say, oh, I know. Let's build something new. Let's get a new app to solve for this feeling of overwhelm. But as we will explore in just a moment, that is actually the dopamine talking. So if you've been here, if you have jumped into a new app hoping it would make everything feel better, or a new planner to get everything organized, it makes total sense. Me too. But that's why today's conversation really matters. Because once we recognize these patterns, we can pause and get curious and make decisions from intention instead of avoidance or anxiety or an attempt to control the world around us, which, speaking from a plethora of experience, rarely ends well. Now, before we get into that though, speaking of dopamine, I want to take a quick moment and share something else that might actually help with this search for dopamine. So if your ADHD brain is constantly searching for the new app or system, and what you really need is a healthy dopamine boost, you might want to grab my free workbook that helps you design your own dopamine menu. It is a step-by-step guide that helps you identify your dopamine boosters and create a ready-made list of personalized activities that give your brain exactly what it needs in the moment. So you can head over to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/menu to grab your free guide. Today, I'm telling you, your ADHD brain will thank you, and so will your productivity stack. All right, let's get back to the strategies in the episode. So the truth is, while researching and setting up the new app or planner can feel incredibly exciting, even productive, it also comes with some very real costs, especially when we are not switching from a place of clarity or need, but instead from that place of urgency or emotional overwhelm. So let's talk about this next, because switching systems, even just experimenting with a new system, can really drain a whole lot more than we realize. First of all, we have our executive function cost, learning that new tool, figuring out how to make it work for your brain, migrating everything over. All of that takes so much mental energy. And when we're already running low, that extra load can kind of tip us straight into shutdown. One of the things that always gets me is the number of decisions required in this process. I'm telling you, decision fatigue can sneak up so fast when we are researching new options, toggling between task managers, comparing features, constantly wondering, is this the right one? What about that one? Well, I just heard about this one over here. And then once we make that decision, we need to decide how we're going to categorize our tasks and our projects and how we're going to group things and which emojis and colors to use. The decisions are constant, and that demands so much of our executive functions. On top of that, on top of our executive function cost, there's the time cost. The time we spend researching new systems, downloading new apps, customizing dashboards, retyping to-do lists, writing them out in the new planner, it adds up fast. And often that time was carved out of the time that we had set aside for the actual tasks we wanted to complete in the first place, or from the time we had set aside for rest or for fun. And then finally, on top of that, we have our emotional cost, because once that novelty of the new thing wears off and we still feel behind or scattered, it's so easy to spiral into those familiar thoughts. Why can't I just stick to anything? I thought this was going to help me. What is wrong with me? Nothing ever works. I'm never going to get it together. And I think one of the sneakiest things overall is that we rarely see or name these costs in the moment. My brain loves to tell me, well, I'm just going to make a small tweak, or I just want to optimize. I just want to organize things to make things a little more efficient. Even more sneaky, my specific flavor of sneakiness, my brain says, this is actually your job. You're an ADHD productivity coach. You need to understand how all of these different things work. I'm telling you, it is endless. Our brains are so sneaky. But more often than not, what's really happening is I am exhausting my brain mentally, emotionally, and energetically for the excitement of something new, or the hope that the next tool will make whatever project I'm tackling seem easier. Of course, as we know, since I have heard from so many of you, what really unfolds is we end up with half-used systems, scattered tools, and more cognitive clutter than we actually started with. Now, let me be clear. I am not suggesting that we should never update an app or change our tools. Okay, that's definitely not the case. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying never explore new tools. But before we do, I think it's incredibly important to pause and make sure the reason we are switching actually serves us. Which brings me to one of my most favorite questions, one that has helped me so many times and many of my clients as well, cut through the noise and get clear on what we actually need. So let's talk about that next. Let's say that you are noticing the urge to switch tools. Maybe something isn't working quite right. Maybe you're tempted to start fresh with that new exciting planner or app you saw scrolling on Instagram last night. Or maybe, if we're being real, life just seems really messy right now and your brain is craving some semblance of control. Here's the question I want you to try on first. What am I hiring this app or planner to do? What am I hiring this tool to do? It is such a simple question, but I am telling you it can change everything. Because instead of evaluating this tool based on what it could do, or how many shiny features it has, or how aesthetically pleasing it looks, we get clear on its actual job in our current system. And I use this metaphor of hiring very intentionally because your apps, your planners, your sticky notes, they are like a team of employees for your life. You wouldn't just hire someone new without knowing whether they have a role to fill, right? You wouldn't just bring someone onto the team. They look cool. Let's see what they can do, okay? So we want to do the same thing with our tools. What's the job? Are you hiring this tool to store and track your appointments? Are you hiring this tool to capture every random thought that pops into your head when you're doing dishes or folding laundry or driving into work and you can't use your hands? Are you hiring this tool to track your routines or your rhythms throughout the day? If we're trying to find one app to do all the things with no clear roles or expectations or boundaries, of course, it's going to feel incredibly confusing and overwhelming. And if we try and juggle a ton of different apps, it's the same thing, but in reverse. right? We just have a bunch of ones that we're trying to bounce between all the time. In fact, I recently coached someone who was dealing with something very similar. So she was debating between a whole bunch of different apps and physical notebooks and planners. She felt incredibly overwhelmed. And her words were something like, I never know where to look. I don't know where anything lives. So I just give up and go fold laundry. And we've all been there, right? So as we talked through it, we honed in on the apps that she regularly used, the ones that she could rely on. And it turned out to be her digital skylight calendar, TickTick on her phone, and her paper planner, those three. So then we walked through the tools one by one and we asked, what job is this tool doing? So the digital calendar, that was her visual schedule. It was a way for her to see a day at a glance anytime she was in the kitchen. And as she explained, she's a mom of 4 very young kids, so she spends probably 90% of her day in the kitchen. So having it there is really useful. So she hired the Skylight digital calendar to track her day and remind her of appointments and where she needs to be. The to-do app that she used, specifically, she uses TickTick, she hired that to be her digital task list. That's where she puts all her tasks. Her paper planner, that tool got a role shift, okay? So it got a new job, and it now holds the position of providing a big picture overview, the zoom out tool, if you will, for the month. It helps her see the month overall. And it also has space on the edges where she can just jot down notes to herself. And then she knows she'll consolidate it into TickTick at the end of each week if she needs to. Okay. So the moment that she assigned each tool a very specific job, things felt so much clearer. She realized she didn't need to throw out the whole system. She didn't need to start over. She needed her tools to stop stepping on one another's toes. My other client, who shared the moving apartments analogy I mentioned earlier, he similarly explored what he wanted his apps to do. And he had another great analogy. His brain is awesome at analogies. It's so fun. He said, what I really want is like a vault, a place to hold everything safely so I know where it lives, even if I'm not ready to act on the thing yet. And I just thought, yes, that is it. Okay, the vault concept, that desire for something secure, dependable, and ready when you need it is so common for so many of us. We want to know we have a place for it all, even if we're not going to work on it today. So for this client, that meant figuring out the specific job of each tool in his stack of 4 apps. So he had Evernote, Apple Notes, Smart Tasks, and Reminders. So his organization breakdown looked like this. Evernote acts like his digital notebook for knowledge, for digital management. Basically, it's long-term storage of digital information. That's the role of Evernote. Then Apple Notes is less permanent. He thinks of it more like a digital sticky note for quick ideas, notes to self. He uses Smart Tasks to keep his tasks and projects, things to do. And then the Reminders app is where he reminds himself of the daily things, like every Thursday, move your car for street sweeping or whatever, okay? And I think this really helps drive home an important point for so many of us. Having everything in just one tool, while that can be really helpful at times, isn't always the answer. In fact, I have a podcast episode on this topic. It's inspired by a quote by Albert Einstein, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But essentially, the idea is make things as simple as possible, but no simpler. So in this case, for my client, the simplest approach was not an all-in-one. The simplest approach to organizing his digital content and tasks and reminders was found in 4 separate apps, with each app having a very clear role. So that's the power of this question. When we ask, what am I hiring this tool to do? We stop chasing the quote unquote best app and start creating a more purposeful system for you. We build a lean team of tools that actually works for us, instead of either expecting one poor, overworked app to do 10 different jobs, wondering why it keeps dropping the ball, or on the flip side, having a super bloated team of apps, 15, 20 apps that essentially do the same thing, and they're competing for work, and each app holds some of our reminders or projects. Knocking over my tea. some of our reminders or projects because there isn't enough work to go around. Instead, what we're doing is we're building the exact team we need for this season. And as I always remind us, when I say this season, I mean that. Sometimes things change. Maybe your kids go to school, or maybe you get a new job, or maybe you are taking on a new project at work or something, and we need to adapt. That's okay. That's when we want to explore this question. Okay? Now, speaking of teams, if you know someone who loves apps and systems and might also benefit from learning this strategy, would you be a rock star and share this episode with them? Maybe you send it to them in a text, or you snap a screenshot, put it on your Instagram stories. If you do that, I'd love it. If you tag me, I can give you a shout out. I'm busy being awesome. But if you know someone, most of us know that person who loves all the apps, all the planners, maybe share this episode with them too. Thank you for helping me get these strategies to even more busy, awesome brains who need them. Now, here's what I want to leave you with. I am not saying don't switch systems. I'm not saying you have to force yourself to stick with something that isn't working. What I am saying is let's do it with intention, because the cost of switching is real. It is costly emotionally, mentally, energetically. So before you make that switch, I encourage you to pause and ask yourself, what am I hiring this app to do? What role will it play? Do I already have something doing this job? Do I like my reasons for making this change? If the answer is yes, if it feels aligned and grounded, if it feels supportive, heck yes, I'm all in. But if you realize your brain might be chasing dopamine, or trying to escape an overwhelming task, or trying to fix a quote unquote messy season by building a brand new shiny system, then maybe it's worth pausing first. You could even try a quick mini audit of the tools you already have, just a moment to check in. Who's on your team right now? What role does each app play? Is anyone doubling up roles? Is anyone underperforming because they're trying to do too much, or because you don't actually know what they offer? That reflection alone can bring so much clarity to our productivity stack. And it could save you hours of future frustration. Not to mention the mental overhead of bouncing between systems, trying to remember where you put what. I promise your future self will thank you. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you are ready to take these concepts and apply them to your life, if you're ready to learn how to support your ADHD in a way that's best for you, I invite you to check out today's show notes, where you can learn more about how we can work together, both in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome, and in one-on-one coaching. Also, if you are looking for something other than a new app or system to soothe that search for dopamine, I've got you covered. Be sure to grab my step-by-step guide to creating your own dopamine menu. You'll discover new ways to get that boost without disrupting your productivity stack in the process. You can grab it now at I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/menu. Give your ADHD brain the dopamine it needs while staying focused on what really matters. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.